So I'll go ahead and get started. So I want to thank everyone again for attending today, the App Builder CRUD 2023 Q1 release. Q1 is not over yet, so there will probably be another release in Q1, but this will be up until now. So today's host, George, is our senior product owner, senior UX architect, all things App Builder and Indigo. He's been with the company now for a very long time and started all of the UX products way back when, last decade or earlier. So it's been quite an adventure with George. And then my name is Jason, and everyone knows me from the App Builder presentations in the past. So let us figure out what we're going to talk about today. So Q1 release features. The title of the webinar was CRUD. CRUD is one of the features we released. You'll get a demo of that and understand what we're doing there, but you'll also see a bunch of other features. I'm going to run through some slides real quick, hand it off to George for a demo, then he's going to hand it back to me. One thing I highly recommend is everyone join the Discord channel. The Discord channel is the place where you'll get all the information about the product releases. It's where you can get the fastest support possible. You can talk directly with the product team. And it's where you can give your feedback, like, hey, I thought this was supposed to do this and it didn't. What's going on? And you're talking to the folks like George, Zdravko, and others who are really building out the product and can help you out along the way. Use the Q&A and the chat to do your questions. The recording will be sent out tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, CRUD, we've been waiting patiently, or you've been waiting patiently for this for many, many months. I've been talking about it now for at least 6 months. We would hope to get it at the end of 2022, but we just shipped it here in 2023 in the first month in January. So what we've implemented here is the ability for you to add new interactions for row added, row deleted, and row edited on the grid. And then you can point those to your REST API methods. So the way that App Builder works is you've got your web API, you get a Swagger definition, you load that into App Builder. We see all of the post, puts, deletes, and gets. And in the past, you could only use the gets. Well, now you can use the post, puts, and deletes. One of the neat things is that in App Builder itself, we've added this feature where you can actually do live editing. So it's not just read only, like you don't have to generate the code and then run it to test out your actual CRUD code. It'll work perfectly inside of App Builder, and you're going to see that today. So the nice thing is that a lot of the CRUD code, a lot of the work ends up in the web API, and then you have to figure out, like, how does this actually work over in my Angular or my web component or my Blazor code? And it's just a lot to know. So we've made it super simple. And this for us is also like a journey. So we've just pushed out V1. You're going to see updates over the next multiple sprints of improvements that we'll make based on feedback. We've already gotten some feedback on how we can improve the generated code. So, as you are exploring this and using this in your applications, let us know, like, hey, I do this. I would like to be able to do this, or I'd like to see something like this in the generated code. Everything that we do for the generated code, we want to make sure works for you. So feedback is critical. We think it's great generated code, but feedback is the only way that we learn as well. The other big feature we just added was hierarchical data binding support. So when you think about the tree grid, tree view, card controls, and other controls that we ship in App Builder, you weren't able to get that hierarchical view, or you weren't able to bind data that was hierarchical that allowed you to set nodes on different hierarchies. So now that works perfectly. So this is an example of the albums and artists, and George is going to demonstrate today what that data looks like and how it actually works inside of App Builder. And because we did add the tree view, this does give you a really nice way to create a dynamic hierarchical menu, which has come up in Discord last year. Like, I've got this menu, it's going to dynamically change based on the user logged in. Well, normally you're applying some sort of hierarchical data to that. You can do it now. Chart aggregations, we demoed a little bit of this last year outside of the App Builder. Now it's inside of the App Builder. This is great. So we've added some different capabilities here in terms of the configuration on the chart itself. So when you are applying a data set to the chart, you can go ahead and add the fields or values or remove values that you don't want, because we're automatically going to try to detect it for you. And then you can set the aggregation type. It's just a couple of clicks. You'll see in the demo today how all this works. We also have some other features in the charts too that we've improved. So we've got label rotation, interval, and range properties, and some other things that you'll note as you start to explore some of the new features in the chart. Then we've added some new sample apps. These are stunning, beautiful sample apps from the design team, and they look great. So we have a learning portal app, an inventory management app, and we're trying to do a couple apps every release. So by the end of the year, maybe we'll have 20 or 25 different sample apps. The whole purpose of these sample apps is that you take them and you make them your own, add your own data, use the designs, use the screens that we made, copy and paste them into your own applications. But if I see a bunch of applications out in the wild that look just like this, maybe the logo has changed, that means that we did a decent job. If you want different types of sample apps, we're always trying to figure out what types of sample apps that we should build, post it into the chat or post it up on Discord, and we will make that happen. And then another big feature is we updated our on-prem containers. If you are a company that does not allow access to SaaS apps like App Builder, we have a completely different license for our on-prem version, which deploys the entire cloud infrastructure into this container onto your on-prem server. So this is something that you can contact us about if you need it. We have a handful of customers that use this now. And the big thing here was we updated all of the Docker container stuff to the latest and greatest Alpine builds, et cetera. So it's a very clean container. So anyway, it's not for everyone, but if you do have that requirement, we definitely will support you. And so finally, we'll jump over to a demo with George. I'll also highlight, we just released an update to our Figma parser. So if you're doing Figma work and you're doing the design to code story, George might be showing that today, but that is also dramatically improved from what we demoed maybe in Q4 of last year or the end of Q3. So with that, George, I'll stop my share and I'll let you take it away for the demo.
So yeah, Figma at the very end, if we have time, I'll show off, how cool our new layout engine actually works for importing apps directly into App Builder. But let's start with the start of the show, which is CRUD and how to use that with OpenAPI. So in my sample app here, I have already set up some stuff. So I'm going to create a blank application here. And I've already added this data source. And this data source is something which we have created internally just for testing our CRUD operations. Let me show you how it looks like. So I basically have pointed it to a Swagger JSON file, and that's got imported into App Builder. And now when I go to configure my endpoints, you can see that not just the get methods, I actually get all the post methods, the put, anything which was available in the API is now available for us to use. And what you're seeing in this UI is a way for you to test this endpoints directly, right? To make sure everything works before we can kind of move forward. You cannot use this endpoint because I already have it set up with authorization. So I have my token in there so that I'm able to kind of unlock all of these things. And the testing pretty much works the same way. So if I have a get method, I can just send and it'll show me what exactly I'm getting here. And just to test out, let's see, there are these, let's just copy this one because it'll help me prepare for the next step. I'm just going to copy this. And you can see that this is a description says George and the name says test. Is just because I'm going to test it. So I want to make sure everything is legit. And what that allows me to do is if I select my category, my delete end method, it says that it requires one parameter. You can still go ahead and select everything directly. And if I do that right now, it'll say something went wrong just because there was something expected while we tested this endpoint. But we'll give you a mock response. So you can actually just move forward with this whole operation, or you can actually test this on this fact. So I can just paste this ID, which I had copied from my GET request, and I send it, and then boom, that ID is now kind of deleted. So this is something which you need to be aware of, is when you're testing it, it's better to create some posts and puts, and then go ahead and delete it instead of actually deleting your actual data. So for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get these methods in here. You can ignore some of these warnings because it's basically saying, hey, you were expected to add some information which you did not. And I'm going to get for customer also. I'm going to get post, get all of these guys. And as you can see, the same thing I mentioned, it's creating these mock responses so that it's ready for you to use. When I go to select data, everything is kind of pre-selected. As you can see, some of the responses are like not a collection, it's just showing you what that response was actually giving us. And we have pre-selected these fields for you. Then this is another small change we have made so that you don't actually have to go in and manually select all for each of these endpoints. It's already done for you. And at this point, my data source is ready. I can hit done. And in order for me to use it, looks pretty simple, but naturally it takes a lot more love and effort in order to make this work. So I'm going to go here, and there is this new data source I've added, this Northwind API, and I'm going to bind it to my customer. And it can pretty much fetches all the customer ID information in here. And now the magic actually happens is that I do not actually have to explicitly set these features up, because if you enable those new interactions we have added, we automatically turn this on for you because we know that that's what you're kind of expecting. But just for, a history lesson, here are all the features which are available inside of the grid, right? So I can actually enable, row editing, row actions. And these are some of these common things you see when you actually make sure that the grid is editable. And on top of that, I'm going to now enable these special interactions or actions for the grid, right? And I'm going to just go ahead and add row added, row deleted, and row edited, and row deleted. And by default, nothing is kind of connected to it. So for row add, I'm going to bind it to a post. And this time I'm going to select the customer because that's what it's bound to. You can see the category also being listed here because depending on your API, it might be such that you're actually posting to a different endpoint and not the same named endpoint. But in this case, post is fine. For row edited, you can see that we are filtering it based on what makes sense. So you do not see delete in that recommended list. Of course, you can just search here. So it'll filter that list for you. So I'm going to do a put request for the customer. And for row deleted, pretty much self-explanatory. I just say customer ID. And at this point, my grid is now CRUD enabled. So when I preview, you'll see that the code is being generated as usual. So I'm just going to hide it for now. And now the row actions, I just enabled explicitly. But as I said, even if you haven't set it up, it'll actually show up fine. And now I can just say, I'm going to delete this record. This is my test record. I can say test 1, 2, 3. I hit done. And here's where we're kind of warning you, right? So while you're in the preview, you're mucking around with your actual data, and we give you the option to actually make live edits or just do dummy stuff, right? So in this case, I'm going to enable my live edit. And when I enable live edit, you see this toolbar, which shows up on the bottom. And the toolbar basically says that, okay, this live editing mode is on. And at this point, if I make changes to something, so let's say alf key, right? So I'm going to make this New York. And I hit done. And at this point, if I refresh, that stuff is in here. So I'm going to just search for alf key here. I'm going to select my alf key. And there's my change, which I just made, right? So this is our Excel style filtering, by the way. I'm going to clear this column filters, apply. And then I can also go ahead and delete stuff in here. So I can just delete this record and it's gone forever. And at any point in time, you can turn off that live editing. And then you can still use the grid, right? I can make these changes. The only difference is that this won't be saved, right? It's just in this design time. So this is send TC. If I refresh and I go ahead and find that customer ID, send TC, yep, apply, it would not have made that change, right? So this is the way you have that flexibility for doing both live editing and not do live editing. And you can turn it back on or off, however you like it. If you turn it off completely, next time you try to delete something, it'll basically warn you again, right? So you have to opt in to doing these kind of changes. Going back to the grid, just to summarize, everything we are showing in this CRUD operations is packaged nicely into these actions which we have built in. This data action is a brand new operation. And now we're going to, in future, build on top of it for more complex scenarios, other components, forms, you name it. But this is the starting point. So when you have feedback to give us about how we can improve it, and Jason is going to follow up after this, after the demos about this more. But please do reach out to us in Discord and let us know what else do you're kind of expecting from this kind of functionality and how you would like it to be extended. Now, with the CRUD operations out of the way, let me give you a quick peek at some of the other things we have handled for data. So in this case, let's talk about hierarchical data. And hierarchical data, I have already added a source which actually has hierarchical data, because that's the other challenge. And you can see here is that this is an array. So this library, I just pulled it from our internal source. And you can see that this is a nested kind of a structure, right? So it says allow children, and it can go deeper depending on how the data source is. And based on this operation, what I have done is I'm going to switch to another app which actually has this in play. And I'm going to show you how I built this out, right? So this is the tree, and tree actually is declaratively creating these nodes, right? So in this case, there's a parent level node and there's another node inside it. And all these levels I manually created, and then I bound it to data. And in here, there is a new concept where we call it data context. So it basically says that not only does it point to a data source, but if the parent is bound or repeated based on a specific collection, we are going to keep that as the context, and then you can choose the next level, which is under it, right? So let's do that from scratch, so you know firsthand how this works. So I'm going to create a brand new master view here. And in here, I'm going to drop the tree. I'm going to resize it. And since I know I'm going to be binding this thing, and I don't need these dummy elements anymore, so I'm going to select my first level here. Actually, I don't need these two either. I select my first level, and this time I'm going to just bind to the collection called Indigo Library. This is the one which is a hierarchical source. So I bind it to that, and now I can pick from the name. So now you can see this accordion, banner, bottom navigation, all of these things are automatically being created. And if I go and preview it, you'll see this tree is automatically bound to this, and you can see this Figma being repeated in here because that's still dummy, right? And I'm going to bind that to something now as a nested level. So I select my second level, click data, and now I'm going to use that data context property, right? I'm saying, okay, what do I need? I'm going to do zones, which is a good one. So I click zones, and now I'm going to bind the content to the zone tag. And now everything which had a zone tag is actually being shown, giving you a quick preview in the design time. And now let's add a third level, right? So just to see how it works, I just say insert, and it's going to add another node at the same level. It's not bound to anything. I'm going to just indent it, change the level. And now it's the third level. Again, I'm going to repeat it based on data. And zones has one additional level, right? So I can just click that initialization level. And then I can choose to do it so that this is not expanded by default, right? So I can just set it up by not expand as default and just hit play. And now you can see all the nodes are automatically bound. It's done pretty quickly. And if I expand it, you will see what are the child actions which are available in here. Great. I didn't bind it. So let's just bind it quickly. This tag, I'm going to select it to selector, a preview, and now it's pretty much done. That's how simple you can declaratively add these nested levels inside of your tree. The same operation can be done for additional components. So I'm going to switch back to the one I have. This is a card, and this card component is pretty much in a row layout, and I've kind of wrapped it, and it's repeating based on data. And this zone tag here is actually now bound to a context in that component. So now I'm showing you zones. It's bound to zones. So when I play this one, this is the same tree I was showing you earlier, but now you can see all of this stuff is being now bound hierarchically to data. And that's how hierarchical data can be used both in the tree context and also in the context of a free-flowing component like the card, where you can bind to different levels of data. Moving on, let's talk about the one quick feature we did for chart aggregations. We have a sample source which you can use just to play with this kind of a feature. So I'm going to add a row layout. I like my favorite Command E or Control E, and I say, give me a row layout. I give it some space and some padding, just making it look a little pretty. And inside here, I'm going to add a chart. And this is a category chart. And this is using very simple data. And in order for you to really explore the chart aggregation feature, you really need messy data. And by messy data is that we actually have this data source available in this financial collection. And I have this one called sales. And if I point to sales, you can see the chart tries to do its level best to make sense of the data, try to pick a chart type automatically, but you can see this is still garbage, right? And this is where chart aggregations actually kick in, because if you actually inspect the data in preview, the chart label rotation has already kicked in. But the main thing you need to notice is that in this kind of a data, which is like a transactional data, it could be your expense catalog, all the labels here, they are being repeated, which is what's causing all this noise, right? And with the chart aggregation feature, what it allows us to do when I go to edit my fields, there's this checkbox. It's called aggregate. And when I click this, it automatically applies an aggregation function on all the values you have here, and it defaults it to sum. And then my chart magically had just cleaned up. It's still set to automatic, but the chart is smart enough to know that this has actually changed, and the column chart would actually fit this need, and it makes that change. On top of it, I can of course sort it, right? I can sort it by the sum of the COGS value or the gross sales value, or ascending or descending. I can change what kind of aggregation function is being applied. And I can of course remove things from this list here so that it looks a little cleaner. So now the sorting would actually look more sensible for you. So if I go here, I say by sale price, by sales, and you can see that trend being happening here. And look at the category axis. It's completely cleaned up because of this aggregation function. All right, moving on to one next thing, which is we talked about the Swagger UI in terms of the CRUD operations. We talked about chart aggregations. We talked about hierarchical data. And then I want to take a little bit of time just to show you what we meant by the whole Figma story. This is something which we are working currently on to improve this drastically. So I'm going to pull up my Figma file here. If you've never used Figma, it works on Windows and Macs, which is why it's kind of popular as a design tool. But let me give you a sense of what the layouts actually do. So I'm going to pull up one of my files here, which is my testing file. And it's like a very generic layout, right? And in Figma, you have this concept of auto layout, which allows you to kind of emulate the web while you're a designer. And it looks nice and pretty here. It looks all grayscale, but that's fine. I just want to show you how it looks like. So I'm going to use one of my our in-progress plugins. All I need to do to get into App Builder is use that Create App option from the plugin. I click Create an App, and it's going to do its magic. It's going to take your designs and pretty much keep it exactly like this when you get it inside of App Builder. And after this, well, let me pull this up here. And this is firing up, again, our internal version of App Builder, but it is pixel perfect. And that is the beauty of using this new and enhanced layout mechanism we're using, which is adopting auto layout from Figma. And if I look inside my editor, everything looks exactly like I would have done it manually. I like the padding, the gap property, everything is mapped correctly. Even the typography, because I used UI kits, it works perfectly. And let me show you something more meaningful, right? Not gray boxes. There is this team collaboration sample, which you would be getting soon. It looks much more interesting than my grayscale prototype. I can go to the same approach. I go to my development, create an app. And this is something which people have dinged us on a little bit because we were still working on both improving the library to give it more support and or to introduce more components and also work on this whole plugin story. But now we had some more time to work on stabilizing this. Let's see what this does. I feel we should be pretty pleased by the output, but let's see. Come on. All right, app is ready. Let's turn off the code view. And voila, it's pixel perfect again. I know it's tough to show you a comparison between both these things, but there is not one pixel out of line with what you have designed inside Figma and what we get inside of App Builder. So everything is being parsed, the icons, the graphics, the imagery, the text, everything is coming directly inside of our App Builder. And very soon you'll be seeing the same capability exposed for you. And you should give us feedback on this one also. I think I covered most of it. Is there anything else you want me to show off, Jason? Just let me know.
No, I think that's awesome, George. Thank you. Awesome demo. All right. So what I'll do now, we have a few minutes. Well, actually, we're already out of time, but I'm going to go and share my screen again. And let's take a look at this screen one and share. Cool. All right. So what I'm going to show here is basically a similar app that George just created. He was using Northwind. I'm actually using the same web API that we used way back in the webinar in November. So if I go over to GitHub, Jay Barris here, and we go to repositories, what you'll see is the Project Manager Web API. And the Project Manager Web API has a database here, Project Tasks DB. You guys can create that yourself, but I'm using the exact same code with one exception. So something interesting happened between .NET 6 and .NET 7 with things like how the schema comes back from a Swagger definition, and they added a new feature when you're using a minimal API. So if you go back and look at code that you might have written before .NET 7, you would return results.ok, and then you would return your object that you just updated, maybe something that you deleted. So in fact, right here on this map post, I'm doing a return results.ok task, and task is my object. But with certain types of operations, you don't get back the application JSON schema of what you just worked on, right? So that's just the way that the web API works. So in the old days, you had to actually use a controller and you created the schema and it was returned back to the caller. Now with typed results, you can remove all that code, use a minimal API, and it just works perfectly. So if I look here at my Swagger definition for something like a stored procedure, for example, so here is a stored procedure to do a post, you'll see that it is going to return with typed results.ok object. Without that, you get nothing back. You just get a 200 success. So in this case, if we try this out, and all we need to do here is pump in a couple IDs here for project ID and priority, and I'll execute this. It fired and it returned this back to the caller, and then you can update the grid row with that information. So it's just a little minor change. When you look at the GitHub repo, you can figure it out yourself, but all this code is up there so you can go to town. And so then what I did here was in App Builder, we've got the same thing happening that George showed. This is the CRUD demo, and he actually showed how this would work right within App Builder. Well, I went ahead and generated the code. So here I've got the code, and what I want to highlight is the big changes that we've made here in terms of the code generation. On the actual grid definition, we've added the events for row added, row edit done, row delete, based on what you set inside of App Builder. So this is new. A couple other features: you must set the primary key because we have to know what is what we should be looking at for an update in the web API. And then, of course, row editable equals true. And then in the actual component itself, we do the get to actually load the data. And then we have the events for each one of these guys. So this is very similar to the code that we wrote back in the web API, and it's very simple. So now if we look at the web service that gets created, again, we are calling my put posts and deletes that are created inside of my project manager web API. We're passing the body, and then you get a return of that same content, but updated, that application JSON, and then you can, or we automatically load it inside of the grid. You don't have to do anything here. All the work is done for you. So if I go back to my grid here, this guy, let's go to our CRUD webinar demo. These are my 2 rows here. And so everyone knows, if I just rerun my query, execute here, you can see, well, I've got 3 rows now. So let's go back and do a refresh here. There's 3 rows there now. So someone is adding some content. I'm going to go ahead and add a new row, and we'll call this new row webinar. And I've got my date pickers here. Let's add a date. Let's add another date. Let's add another date. In my SQL Server, these are not required fields, but this is project ID. Assigned to email is as well. And I just pop something in there, priority 1, click done, and there is my new data. If I bring back my server, I click execute, everything is there. There's my new row webinar. I can refresh my page. It is all there. I can delete this guy. If we want to go in here and click edit, change string to thanks, George. Great demo. And we click done, do a refresh. We get thanks, George. Great demo. And of course, all the other features with the grid works. You get your Excel style filter and all the other good stuff. So I wanted to highlight that actual code generated piece, which is just amazing and very exciting. And I hope that you guys start using this right away. Give us feedback, because we are pretty pumped about what you should be able to do with this. So now let's go ahead and fire up the poll. I'm going to launch the poll. If you guys can take some time as we're wrapping up here to answer the poll. And of course, the poll drives features, and it drives all the stuff that we do, behind the wall, to make sure that what we're building is what you guys want to use. So ignore my Discord link here. The updated Discord link is in the chat. Thank you, Jesse, or JJ, I think, posted that in there. I appreciate it. But get started with App Builder today. We know that App Builder can save you up to 80% of your time when you are starting applications or you're building existing applications. There's all kinds of scenarios that you can use to accelerate your app building. You can build entire apps from scratch. You can just build screens that maybe you copy paste and put into your existing app. You can build partial apps. We synchronize with GitHub. You can manage changes over time with GitHub. You don't have to worry about that. We've updated how that whole interaction with GitHub works. So it is very exciting how you can really handle your app building within App Builder today. We're continuing to improve feature sets. The roadmap is exciting for the next couple of months. I think through, we're already getting into the middle of February. We've got March and April. So by the end of April, or maybe middle of May, we'll definitely be showing everyone things like master detail, things like the hierarchical grid, which now we've shipped in our platforms, but we need to now add to App Builder. The team is busy at work getting things like some of the controls that aren't in App Builder yet, but are in, the Ignite UI product, finishing all of this up. So by the middle of the year, we want to have all this core stuff done, right? Where you can do master detail CRUD, you can use hierarchical data, you can use hierarchical grids and all that cool stuff. And even introducing Reveal, our BI, as a component into App Builder is something that we want to do too, because we have a lot of customers that are using both products. They're using App Builder, they're using Reveal. I've done a bunch of demos on how to combine that with code, but we will make it easy for you. So please, if you haven't used App Builder, get it today. The next webinar is March 2nd. We are going to be focused on the Blazor grid. If you're a Blazor developer, we're going to just do 30 minutes or 45 minutes all about Blazor grid, how to bind data to it, how to set up features. We'll show with App Builder and without App Builder, doing things like column templates, performance optimizations, etc. So we're really excited about the Blazor grid that we shipped last year in 22.2. It only gets better with every release. And please sign up for that webinar. Blazor is hot. There's a ton of .NET developers out there like myself that are really excited about Blazor. And they're already talking about .NET 8 and all the cool stuff in Blazor coming in .NET 8. So yeah, we're pumped about it too. So join us March 2nd. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank George. I really appreciate his demo. Everything will be online. You'll get an email tomorrow with the link to the webinar to share with your friends. And of course, this slide deck. And we will see you at the next webinar. Talk to you guys soon and have a great rest of the week. Thank you.